It's a joy to welcome to the pulpit somebody that most of you know and love already. His name is Wade Mitchell. He is the spouse of Lorraine Mitchell and father of Gage and one on the way. Wade and Lorraine joined our church in 2008. Wade is a member of the Board of Stewards of this church. Wade is a graduate of Union Theological Seminary and is now a PhD candidate in theological and philosophical studies at Drew University. And perhaps most important of all, at least for me, when duty called on behalf of this wonderful congregation, Wade stepped up to come and preach to us all today. So please give him your attention and welcome him.
Does it seem to anyone else that today is a particularly full Sunday? To be perfectly honest, in preparing to speak to you, a part of me would have preferred to concentrate either on World AIDS Day or the fact of its being the first Sunday in Advent, but not both at the same time. It seems a little complicated. But the more I thought about what Advent might mean for us, the more I came to realize how necessary it is to try to hold all of this together. All of this together. Perhaps having two complex and tentative celebrations on the same day is entirely fitting for this season. I mean, let's face it, each and every day on this planet holds as much tension as any of us are willing to confront or even recognize. Why should we ignore this fact just because it's the beginning of the Christmas season? For us who say we are the Church of God in Jesus Christ, if the truth of Advent cannot become something real for us in the very midst of our complex times, then perhaps we should question why it is we're even here. The season of Advent literally seeks to name and celebrate that which is to come. But what is it that is coming? Who or what in the world are we all waiting for? I ask you to keep these questions close and pray with me. Dear gracious God, we ask that you come to this place. Help us to wait, to learn what waiting means, to act as a people expectant of your goodness. I ask that the words that I say may be pleasing to you, uplifting to this people, and if they aren't, may they fade away and cause no harm. We ask this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. So I have something to confess to you, and I want you to promise me that you will not tell Gage what I'm about to say. I love to climb up things. It's true. It's true. The higher, the better. Growing up, I used to climb up on top of my parents' garage, my parents' house, my high school, county water towers. I even climbed up the grain elevator in my small town. From up there, I could see this square mile that is my town's city limits. And I could watch our one police officer slowly cruising. When I moved to Colorado, I climbed mountains, but of course there they call them 14ers, as in 14,000 feet high. And the first time I visited New York City, what do you think I did? That's right, I went to the top of the Empire State Building. I could look north over Central Park, and then south over the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor. Whether it be the simple activity of a small town or an entire city unfolding itself before my eyes, for me, there's nothing better than a view of things from up high. No matter the altitude, I get excited by being able to see so much at one time. You can understand then how glad I was to read this scripture lesson from Isaiah this week. My desire for height, it seems, is biblical. Brent just read a few lines. from this prophetic text, and we heard it express a hope for the future. But before describing a world without war, a world, as I've heard it said, of farms, not arms, and Isaiah 2:2 announces that in days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the highest of mountains, and shall be raised above the hills. All the nations shall stream to it. Now, building God's temple high upon a mountain was a typological reality in the religious landscape of the ancient Near East. For the people of Israel, it meant setting their God apart and above everything, a symbol of God's power and sacred rule over the entire land. But is this all Isaiah's desire for height is about? One way to understand this text is to recognize the historical realities which Isaiah's vision sought to address. As we currently have this text in our Bibles, the book of Isaiah took several centuries to write and to arrange. Those people who heard Isaiah did so as ones in the midst of constant geopolitical struggles to survive. Isaiah was speaking to a people weighed down by life-reducing complexities of being a vassal nation, conquered and oppressed first at the hands of the Assyrians and later by the Babylonians. Their collective anxieties bred tense infighting and created constant instability. Because of the world they lived in, the people of Israel were struggling to maintain their expectations in the God of Exodus. It was nearly impossible for them to see the freedom that was to come. To every generation, Isaiah's message is the same. God is in all the events of history and radically on every side of things. And for the prophet, the people of God will not only proclaim this, but will practice living it. He says, "Come, let us go to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he may teach us his ways, that we may walk in his paths." Isaiah's desire for height is about a people's need to gain some altitude on a complex situation. Only from the height of God's temple could this people learn to live in a world of brutal political change. Isaiah's desire for height directly challenges my own desire to climb up to the top of things just to see more. There is a dramatic difference between just getting a better view and actually gaining a perspective. This service opened with an AIDS Day litany that we all recited together. It expanded our attention. It broadened our view. We are invited to see how people with HIV were not only living and dying in the United States, but also in the villages of Uganda, in the ghettos of Kenya, and in the shanty towns of Brazil, South Africa, and Haiti. In a very real sense, this litany is about a view of the globe from high up in the sky, as if all of us together were suddenly given a chance to view the planet all at once. From this height, we see the ongoing global pandemic that is AIDS. We recognize that 33 million people around the world right now live with the realities of HIV. We understand that of the new cases which emerge each year, including over 56,000 in the United States alone, only 2 out of every 5 people actually receive the medical treatment they need. $5 million people die of AIDS each year. From this height, we not only see how those with HIV are being cared for, or too often being rejected, but if we turn our eyes to other realities as well, we see a radically mixed up world, a planet full of good things, mundane things, and of course, violence. We see some people making love. We see someone on the ground being kicked. Another one here is making a sandwich. Another over there is kissing her baby's forehead. One more over here is in handcuffs. Another's riding a bicycle. One here is protesting. Another over there is just falling asleep. And others we see are about to die. From a certain height, every single day looks like this. And all of it happening right now. But I don't have to tell you any of this. We don't need to imagine a hypothetical view from somewhere above the ground to realize how complicated our world is. We all read the papers, or at least their websites. We watch the world news. Like no other time in history, we can see places and people all over the globe. People living and dying. And all of it happening right now, depending on where you choose to look. Our views of the world are astonishing. But do we have any perspective? Again, Isaiah's words have something to teach us. Yes, it is true that we cannot hide our eyes from the news of the world. But can we learn how to see it and to live in the midst of it with a better perspective? He says, "For out of Zion shall go forth instruction, and the word from the Lord, from Israel, from Jerusalem." If we hear Isaiah, we will climb up to God's mountain, literally or symbolically, for it is from here that we learn from God what to expect. From a certain perspective, we come to understand what it is we are waiting for. Isaiah, in the midst of violence, waits for a time when nations shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Isaiah waits for a time to come when the instruments that shed blood are transformed into tools that bear good fruit. It is only by gaining some perspective on things that we can learn what it is we are waiting for, and to practice this waiting in the midst of our complex lives. On this first Sunday of Advent, for many of us, another first Sunday of Advent, we as a church must struggle to gain some perspective. We need to ask ourselves some difficult questions. What do we do with all that we see and hear about in the world? Do we expect God to actually come here? Into this complex mixture of good things, mundane events, and violence. How often is more pain and suffering what we expect to see? When we're listening to the news, how often do we wait for it to get worse? The season of Advent is a process of waiting and learning how to wait. Coming to expect something good from this world, it takes time. We are often too covered over by life's suffering to expect anything good to come to us tomorrow. We are often too familiar with its pain to quickly gain a needed perspective on it all. But we can take comfort during this process by a people's wisdom. Only a people intimate with the oppression of this world could write Mark 13:24-25, just before proclaiming, "See the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory." The gospel lesson from Mark begins by quoting lines familiar to the Hebrew Scriptures, lines found in the books of Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Joel. These lines say that in those days, after that suffering, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the sun coming. Mark's gospel is trying to teach us that just as our very world is falling down all around us and about to fade away, we will see God come to us again. For Christians, God comes to us in Jesus Christ. In Mark's gospel, the temple of God had crumbled and was just about to. But God was going to come to his people from the midst of that destruction. In Mark's vision, we learn something very important about the Advent season. What is to come on Christmas is the beginning of a story we already know something about. What we wait for during Advent, what we celebrate on Christmas, has already come. God's birth in this world through Jesus has been coming into the world ever since Jesus left it. But if the expectations of a God who continues to come into the world are not born in each one of us, not working to change our perspective, then we will find our waiting to be futile. May we struggle together during these 4 weeks of Advent to learn what to expect to see coming out of this world. May this come to be born in each of us this season. Amen.